Okay, welcome back. This is week 8. Can you believe it? So week 8 in a 16-week course, you've kind of figured that out, right? This is time for the midterm exam. Now, the midterm exam is kind of sort of important. I mean, it's worth 12.5% of your grade. So, yeah, you probably do need to study for this thing. And I'm here to help you study. That what I'm going to do is we're going to go through a list of topics that are going to appear on the exam. And the idea is, instead of you studying this much, you can study this much because I'm telling you what's going to be on the exam. Okay? Good. All right. So let's just go through the list and we'll pick it up where we go. All right. I'm just going to open this in Notepad just to make it a little easier to manipulate. Okay. So let's talk about the rules first. So this is the midterm exam. It's the first 7 chapters. That's 1 through 6 plus Appendix A. Obviously you're taking this at home, so it's open book, open notes, open internet, open everything. I don't care. All right. There's 40 questions in a pool. Now, you're not going to get 40. You're going to get 25. The machine is going to randomly pick 25 questions out of this pool and give them to you. Now, that means that I can't tell you what order the questions are going to appear in. I can't tell you which ones you're going to get. It's just completely random. Okay, cool. So in addition to the 25, everybody gets the 2 extra credit questions at the bottom. Okay. Now, I'm providing you the chapter and page numbers so you can look. So, for example, I don't know, let's pick this one. Matrix Organizational Structure. So if you go to chapter 2, page 49, that's where that topic is being talked about. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the question came from that exact page. And it certainly doesn't mean that the answer to the question is going to be found on that exact page. What this is a location of where the topic is being discussed in the book. Now, there's a column for no, which means it either was not adequately covered in the book or not covered at all, which kind of brings you to an interesting point. If I say something is not in the book and then I give you a page number for something I've already told you is not in the book, right? Okay. So sometimes you just have to... Sometimes the page number, when there's a no, is just like the section heading in the book that talks about the topic. And you have to use your own notes. As always, about 20% of the questions come from lecture. So yes, you actually have to pay attention and take notes in the lecture, just like a real honest-to-God college course, huh? Okay, it is going to be timed. You're going to have an hour and 15 minutes. Now, if you do the math, you have either 25 or 27, depending on how you count. 27 questions, and you have an hour and 15 minutes. I mean, that is not very much time. I mean, that's just a couple minutes apiece. So you really need to be spending time studying, so when these questions come up, you just answer them just like that. Because you don't have 5 minutes to go, oh, well, let me go look that up. You ain't got that kind of time. Okay. So let's just go through the list, and we'll talk about what's going on. So the first one talks about strategic technologies. So this might be one of those things where we just say, like, which of the following are true of the strategic technologies that are available? And, you just go through and, like a multiple answer kind of thing, something like that. Okay. The next one talks about project attributes. Remember, so a project, have certain types of attributes, and so it could be one of those exact kind of scenarios where, which of the following are valid, project attributes. Constraints. You remember the constraints thing? Remember the CIA triangle thing? Okay, if you can remember that, you'll be good to go to answer that question. The next one talks about the portfolio. And so, remember we talked about all the projects that you could be working on, and then you have a portfolio of projects that you could be doing. And so you organize them in such a way that it meets your business needs and all the rest of that stuff. So, know a little bit about what a project portfolio is. The next one talks about certification. And, this book was written with the Project Management Institute kind of in their hip pocket because they make references to their stuff a lot. I mean, an awful lot, which is okay. It's good stuff. But there are some issues with, like, if you wanted to get a certification, which certification could you actually apply for? Okay. That would be good information. The 3-sphere model is kind of sort of like the CIA triangle. Not really. but the three sphere model. Do I want to pay attention to technology pieces or the human pieces, those kinds of things? And so I may ask you some questions about, which one of those spheres, what does it mean, or how does it apply, and those kinds of things. The 4 frames of an organization. So remember we talked about how, depending on how you're, the little box model, a little 4-frame thing, and maybe a question like, which one of these 4 frames would represent this scenario? And so I give you a scenario, and you go, aha, it's the organizational one, or it's the politic one. The next one talks about organizational structures. There's a lot of different types of organizational structures. Remember, there's the functional model, right? And then the functional model means all engineer people work for the engineering department, regardless of what project they're working on. The project one, which is, okay, I have a project over here, so I have all the people that dealing with this project, and another project over here, and all the people that deal with that project. And then you have the matrix, and there's 3 different flavors of the matrix, depending on where the resources are, who's controlling the money. Okay, if you remember a little bit about that, you'd be okay. Okay, the next one talks about the project phases. In the book, they start off with this whole concept of, planning and initiating and, going through all these kinds of things and executing, and, the major project phases. And so just remind yourself about what all those. I'll probably give you some examples and say, which one of these examples is in execution, and which one is in closeout, and which one is in whatever. The next one talks about the system development lifecycle, the SDLC. So there's different flavors. If you recall, the SDLC is traditionally one of the predictive ones, right? Because remember, we have the predictive suite of things we can do, and then we have the adaptive suite of things that we can do. And so the SDLC is probably one of the traditional ones from the predictive point of view, right? Okay, so I'm going to ask you some questions about, how all does that work? Process groups. So again, this is going to be one of those. Remember how the book kind of breaks up, sort of like the phases of a process. They have the process groups that go along, and they want to say that these process groups apply to practically. Remember that matrix where they had the 5 parts of the domain and the 10, and they have a nice little matrix. That's kind of what we're talking about. Is the process groups. Okay, so I'm going to ask you some questions about, how does that work? Maybe match this statement with this process group, that kind of thing. The next one talks about project management methodology. You actually have some choices on how you can manage your projects. And so I'm going to ask you some questions on, like, which of the following are valid examples of the project management methodology options, something like that. The next one talks about the project charter, and I put a no next to that because we talked about something about the project charter that was not in the book. And if you can remember what that significant thing was, one of the things that the project charter is used for that was not mentioned in the book. If you can remember that, you'd be in good shape. And you don't have to really remember, right? You go back to, chapter 3. I'll go look at the lecture notes and see what it says. Yeah, okay, good. Project risks. You remember in Project 3 that they made a prioritized list of things that would possibly go wrong? Remember that? And almost everyone has the same kinds of problems, when they're working on well, maybe not problems, but same amount of risk. And one of the key ones has been, I don't get the kind of information I need. I don't get the information from my internal people and my external people, my consultants. I just don't get the information I need, so therefore I end up doing something that's dumb. So monitoring and control, one of those, remember the 5 of those project phases and the 5 and the 10 matrix thing? Okay. So one of these things is monitoring and control. And so I'm asking you, where does it kind of fit in there? I mean, does it fit there Is it in the execution part? Is it in closing? Is it initiating? Where does it all fit in the big picture? Where do those tasks show up? Project closing. So once again, I'm asking you for something that's different, that's not in the book. In lectures, we talked about, in addition to the normal thing about project closing, there's something else that typically occurs at this step, particularly if you're a third-party, contract kind of a thing. So, yeah, that's kind of sort of important. The next one is Chapter 4, talking about integration management. If you recall, the whole point of integration management is just to facilitate communication. I mean, that's really what it does for a living. Listen, you could have condensed this entire chapter down to talk to people. Okay? That's kind of what integration management is all about. Okay, but I'm going to ask you some questions about how that part works. The next one is the stages of the selection process. So there was a little diagram, a little pyramid kind of a thing that talked about, step 1, step 2, step 3, or not really, steps is not really appropriate, but the stages of how you would go about selecting a process. So, I've got 15 potential projects, and I'm not going to do all 15. I'm probably going to do like 2. So how do I pick 2 out of the 15? So the stages of the selection process. The next one is kind of sort of similar in that is you have some choices on how you would go about doing selections. In other words, remember we talked about one of the selections is, the cost benefit, kind of a thing, all the economic kind of stuff. It could be, cost benefit ratio, it could be break even point, all those kinds of things. And others are more, esoteric, like, the one that's going to, best suit my customer needs, those kinds of things. So if you can remember a little bit about the methods that you would use for selecting selecting projects to do, okay? So that's pretty good. Let's continue. The next one talks about the change control board. And so changes, maintaining changes, monitoring changes, recording changes, that's very, very important for lots of reasons. Okay. So one is make sure you don't forget something. That's very important. If somebody asks you to do something and you didn't write it down and then you didn't end up doing it, they're going to be highly pissed. The other is, okay, I said it was going to cost $1 million, but it ended up costing $1.5 million. But before you fuss at me, look at all these approved changes that you made. Okay. So yes, the change control board is kind of sort of important, but it also can be used as kind of a way of preventing changes from occurring. If you wanted to have a scenario where, I don't want changes, dang it, so I'll just create a change control board scenario that makes it difficult. The next one talks about scope. And so, once again, the idea is, yes, the definition of scope is okay. It's all the processes and things you have to do to be able to get the project to work. Okay, whatever. But that's not really what most people think of as scope. And so I'm going to ask you some questions about, what the alternate definition or whatever, I guess it's appropriate. In addition to the textbook definition, what is the other definition? Collecting requirements. Okay. Now, we talked about this a great deal. You can interview people. You can interview people in groups. You can do direct observation. You can pull data from other systems. There's all sorts of techniques you can use for collecting requirements. And so I'm going to ask you some questions about one of those. I'll pick one and say, well, if you're using this technique, what could possibly go wrong? Okay. Poor scope. So basically, what are the consequences of you not getting the scope correct? That would be a good question or a good scenario for a question. Okay, so we're coming up on the 15-minute mark, so I'm just going to stop this and we'll pick this thing up again in just a few.